"You're not going to believe what's in that basket," I whispered, my voice so low that Marlene, 2 steps ahead of me in the produce aisle, didn't catch it right away. She turned around, her arms full of apples, and gave me a look though halfway between confusion and mild annoyance. "What basket?" I didn't answer. I just nodded toward the small grocery cart pushed off to the side, parked between the potato bins and a display of sale-priced dish soap. A woven basket sat inside it, lined with what looked like an old flannel shirt. The shirt was bunched up in a cozy little nest, and right in the middle of it, breathing slowly, eyes closed, tiny body curled like a crescent moon, was a golden-brown puppy no bigger than a loaf of bread. The sight froze me where I stood. Her fur was warm-colored even in the cold overhead light, a soft mix of honey and cream, with ears a little too big for her head and paws that seemed almost comically oversized. The rise and fall of her sides was steady, and the tiniest puff of air escaped from her small black nose each time she exhaled. She looked so peaceful it almost didn't feel right to disturb her. Marlene's eyes went wide, and the apples in her arms shifted dangerously as she stepped closer. "Is she alone?" I scanned the aisle, expecting to see someone hovering nearby, maybe the owner bending over the shelves or talking to a store clerk, but the place was oddly quiet for a Saturday morning. 2 older women were in the far corner by the bread, chatting over a shopping list, and a teenage bagger was stacking soda cans on the end cap, earbuds in. Nobody seemed to be claiming the basket. "I think so," I said finally. "There's no leash, no collar either." Marlene set her apples gently into her own cart and knelt beside the basket. "Oh my goodness, she's just a baby. How'd she even get here?" I crouched too, feeling my knees pop, and peered down at the puppy. Now that I was closer, I could see the tiniest flicker of movement under her eyelids, as if she were dreaming. Her little chest rose and fell, and her tiny paws twitched occasionally, maybe chasing something only she could see. "Should we wake her up?" Marlene whispered. I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to interrupt that perfect little scene. It felt like catching the first snow on your glove or watching a candle flicker in a quiet room. You don't want to move too fast and ruin it. But another part of me knew we couldn't just leave her there. Just as I reached down, a voice startled both of us. "Is there a problem over here?" It was the store manager, a tall man named Pete we'd seen plenty of times before. He walked over from the front registers, wiping his hands on a rag, and glanced down into the basket. His face softened almost instantly. "Well, She was just here," I explained. "Do you know who she belongs to?" Pete shook his head. "Nope. I've been at the front all morning. Haven't seen anyone bring her in." "Somebody must have left her." Marlene looked up at him sharply. "Left her? You mean on purpose?" He shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "I don't want to assume anything, but we've had folks drop off kittens by the dumpster before. Maybe they thought someone in here would take her." The idea made my stomach twist. I looked back at the puppy, who, as if on cue, stirred. Her tiny head lifted just enough for her to peek at us with the sleepiest brown eyes I'd ever seen. She blinked once, then again, and then her mouth opened in a slow, squeaky yawn. The moment she met my gaze, something inside me shifted. "Hey there, sweetheart," I murmured, reaching my hand toward her. She sniffed my fingers delicately, then inched forward to lick the tip of my thumb. Her tongue was warm and soft, and it felt like a small spark traveled right from that touch into my chest. Pete scratched his chin. "Well, we can't just leave her sitting here. Store policy says no animals unless they're service dogs, but I'm not about to call the pound. Marlene straightened. Then what do we do? I'll call my cousin at the shelter, Pete said. She can... No, I interrupted before I could think better of it. Both Pete and Marlene looked at me. I mean, maybe we can take her home. Just for now, until we figure out what's going on. Marlene's eyebrows shot up. We? I glanced at her. Well, I can't exactly keep her at my place, and the landlord barely lets me keep plants. But your backyard's fenced, and... She laughed softly. You're quick to volunteer my house. But then she looked down at the puppy again, who was now sitting up in the basket, tiny tail wagging. Still, she's pretty hard to say no to. Pete seemed relieved. If you two are willing to look after her, I'll make an announcement in case her owner's still here. But if nobody claims her, I'll cover her for now, I said. The announcement went out over the store speakers a few minutes later, but nobody came. Not in the next 5 minutes, or 10, or even 20. We lingered in the produce section, the basket parked beside us, answering curious glances from other shoppers who stopped to coo at the puppy. An older man in a baseball cap paused, resting his hand on his cart. She's a beauty. Bet she'll grow into those paws. Another woman, holding a toddler, smiled at the puppy but shook her head. Not mine. I wish she was, though. By the time we made it through the checkout, the puppy had won over half the store. Marlene carried the basket out to her car while I followed with our groceries. The winter air was sharp, and the puppy shivered a little, so I draped my scarf over the basket. She snuggled into it without hesitation. On the ride to Marlene's house, she stayed curled up, occasionally glancing up at us with those big brown eyes. Every time she did, Marlene's lips curved into a smile she probably didn't even realize she was making. What do we even name her? She asked as we pulled into her driveway. I thought about it for a moment, watching the puppy tilt her head at the sound of Marlene's voice. We'll figure it out once she's had a nap somewhere warmer than a grocery basket. Inside, we set the basket down in the living room, near the fireplace. The puppy stepped out cautiously, her nails ticking softly against the hardwood. She sniffed the rug, the couch, a pair of slippers by the door, and then looked back at us as if asking permission to explore more. Go ahead, Marlene encouraged, crouching to scratch behind her ears. The puppy leaned into the touch, closing her eyes briefly, then trotted a few steps toward the kitchen. For the next half hour, we watched her wander every corner of the house, tail wagging faster each time she discovered something new. She found the sunny patch by the back door, the squeaky step on the staircase, and even a dust bunny under the couch that she seemed weirdly proud of locating. By the time she circled back to us, her steps were slower, and she yawned again, curling right up between us on the rug. The firelight reflected in her eyes, and for a moment the room felt unusually warm, not from the heat, but from something softer and harder to define. Marlene looked at me over the puppy's head. I think she's already decided this is home. I didn't say it out loud, but I knew she was right. The first night was supposed to be temporary. That's what we told ourselves as we set up a little nest of blankets in Marlene's laundry room, tucking them into the corner near the radiator so the puppy would stay warm. Marlene rummaged through her linen closet for an old quilt, while I found a mixing bowl that could serve as a water dish until we picked up real supplies. We'd stopped at the grocery store again on the way back to grab a bag of plain kibble, not knowing what she was used to eating, and the moment I set it down, she nosed into it eagerly. It was like watching a tiny engine start up. Her whole body got into it, tail wagging, paws shifting as she chewed. "She's starving," Marlene murmured. "Or she's just making up for a missed lunch," I said, though the thought lingered in my mind that she might not have eaten in a while. When she finished, she wandered over to the quilt, turned in 3 slow circles, and flopped down with a little huff. I crouched to give her a scratch under the chin. "We really should give her a name," I said. Marlene sat on the laundry room step, hugging her knees. "We don't know if she belongs to someone. If we name her, that's it. She's ours." I thought about that. We can't just keep calling her Puppy. Then what about something simple? Marlene glanced at the small patch of white fur on the puppy's chest. "Daisy? She's kind of got that sweet springtime look." The puppy lifted her head at the sound, and her tail thumped once against the quilt. "I think she likes it," I said. "Daisy it is, for now." We stayed there for a while, talking in low voices, so as not to wind her up again before bed. Every so often, Daisy would open her eyes to check that we were still nearby, then drift back into that heavy, twitchy sleep puppies have. By the time I headed home, Marlene had promised to call me in the morning with an update. I left her house with my phone already in my hand, halfway tempted to check for lost pet notices online. But once I got home, I found myself sitting at my kitchen table, replaying that look Daisy had given me in the store. The slow blink, the small lick to my thumb. It was ridiculous how quickly it had sunk into me. The next morning, Marlene called just after sunrise. "She made it through the night fine," she said, her voice still thick with sleep. "Woke me up twice, though. First time was for water, second time was just to say hi." I laughed. "You're a soft touch." "I think she might be teething too." She tried to chew on the leg of the coffee table. I gave her an old slipper instead. "I'll be over in an hour," I told her. "We can figure out what to do next." When I arrived, Daisy was sprawled on her back in the middle of the living room rug, all 4 paws in the air. She spotted me immediately and scrambled to her feet, skittering over on unsteady legs to greet me with a tail wag that shook her whole back end. "She's been like this all morning," Marlene said, watching Daisy bounce around. "Full of energy." We took her outside into the backyard, which was fenced and still dusted with a layer of frost from the night before. Daisy stepped gingerly onto the grass at first, sniffing the icy tips, then broke into a wobbly run toward the far corner. She stopped halfway there, distracted by a dry leaf blowing past, and pounced on it like it was the most exciting thing in the world. "Definitely not shy," I said, grinning as she trotted back to us with the leaf in her mouth. We spent the next hour letting her explore, tossing a ball gently across the yard, and laughing every time she tripped over her own paws. By the time we brought her inside, she was panting happily, flopping onto the kitchen floor with a satisfied sigh. Over coffee, we discussed what to do about finding her owner. Marlene suggested posting a picture on the neighborhood Facebook group. I offered to make some flyers to hang around town. We both agreed that if someone came forward, we'd do the right thing. But we also both avoided saying out loud how much we already hoped nobody would. By afternoon, we had our flyers printed and were taping them to lampposts, bulletin boards, and shop windows. Daisy came along for part of it, riding in a little crate in the back seat and watching the world with wide, curious eyes. At the local hardware store, a man leaning on the counter squinted at the flyer we handed him. "Don't think I've seen her before. We don't get many strays around here. Too cold this time of year." At the library, the receptionist smiled at the picture. "If nobody claims her, you let me know," she said. "She's adorable." Back at Marlene's, we checked online for lost pet posts, but found nothing. Daisy had curled up in the armchair, head resting on the armrest, as if she'd been doing it all her life. Every now and then, her tail would twitch in her sleep. That evening, we decided she needed a proper walk. Marlene had dug out an old leash from when she used to dog sit for a friend, and though it was a bit too big, we managed to clip it to a makeshift harness made from a scarf. Daisy didn't love the idea at first. She wriggled and tried to nibble the leash, but once we got moving, she forgot all about it. We strolled down the quiet streets, passing houses strung with winter lights and yards littered with the last of the autumn leaves. People stopped to admire her, bending down to scratch her ears or ask where we'd found her. We told the story so many times that by the time we got home, it felt like half the neighborhood knew about Daisy. The days that followed settled into a gentle rhythm. Mornings were full of little adventures, short walks, visits to the backyard, supervised exploring in the house. Afternoons often meant naps in sunbeams or on Marlene's lap, followed by bursts of playful energy that had us laughing more than we had in weeks. We learned quickly that Daisy had a knack for finding small treasures. A missing sock from behind the dryer, a forgotten tennis ball under the porch, a crumpled receipt from under the couch. She'd trot over proudly, prize in mouth, tail wagging like she'd just discovered gold. One afternoon, while I was sitting on the floor trying to teach her sit with bits of kibble, Marlene walked in holding her phone. "Still no replies on the flyers," she said quietly. I looked at Daisy, who had just plopped down in front of me, eyes bright and expectant. "Maybe that's a sign." Marlene hesitated. "You think we should keep her?" I shrugged, though my heart was already leaning one way. If no one's looking for her, she might already have found where she's meant to be. Daisy tilted her head as if she understood. That night, as the three of us sat by the fireplace, I realized that the house felt different now. Warmer, livelier, like something had shifted in its center of gravity. And though neither of us said it outright, we both knew this was more than just fostering a lost dog. This was the beginning of something we weren't quite ready to name yet. The following week began with a morning so bright, it made the frost sparkle like sugar on every lawn. I was already halfway through a cup of coffee when Marlene called, her voice carrying that mixture of excitement and mild panic I'd started to recognize. She's learned how to open the back screen door. I nearly choked on my coffee. "What?" She pushed it with her nose until it swung open. I was making breakfast and she was halfway into the yard before I noticed. I laughed. Guess she's smarter than we thought. Smarter didn't even begin to cover it. By the time I got to Marlene's, Daisy had perfected her new trick, and she demonstrated it with obvious pride. She trotted up to the back door, pressed her nose to the edge of the screen, and nudged it open just far enough to slip through. She looked back at us, as if expecting applause. "That's going to be trouble," Marlene muttered, though I could see the corners of her mouth twitching upward. We decided a trip to the pet store was overdue. Daisy needed a proper harness, a sturdy leash, and maybe a toy or two that could survive her growing teeth. The pet store was bustling when we arrived, the air thick with the smells of kibble, treats, and every type of bedding imaginable. Daisy was on sensory overload, sniffing every aisle, her tail wagging like a metronome set to double time. A young clerk knelt down to greet her. "What a beautiful pup. How old is she?" "We're not sure," Marlene admitted. "She's new to us." The clerk grinned. "Well, she's got the spirit of a puppy, that's for sure." She pointed us toward the harnesses. "If she's a door opener, you'll want one that fits snug, and maybe a bell on her collar so you can hear when she's sneaking off." We spent nearly an hour letting Daisy test out squeaky toys, chew bones, and a tug rope she instantly tried to drag toward the checkout. By the time we left, we had a small pile of supplies: a soft teal harness, a matching leash, a few durable toys, and a bag of treats shaped like tiny bones. That afternoon, Daisy strutted around the backyard in her new harness as if she'd been born to wear it. She discovered that if she leapt into the air and landed just right, she could send her new ball bouncing in unpredictable directions, which seemed to amuse her endlessly. In the evenings, I started stopping by Marlene's after work, just to see Daisy. Sometimes we'd sit on the porch with mugs of tea while Daisy explored the yard. Other nights we'd sprawl in the living room while she gnawed contentedly on a chew toy. It was becoming a habit, one neither of us questioned. Midweek, I suggested we take Daisy to the park on the edge of town. It was one of those sprawling green spaces that stayed open year-round, with winding paths and a small lake where ducks gathered. The first time Daisy saw the water, she froze, ears perked, then barked once as if to announce her discovery. "She's going to want to chase them," Marlene warned, holding the leash tight. We walked for nearly an hour, passing joggers, parents with strollers, and other dog owners who all seemed to be drawn to Daisy. She greeted everyone with a gentle wag and that earnest, slightly clumsy charm that made people smile. One older man paused to pat her head. "Looks like she picked you," he said, with a knowing smile before continuing down the path. That night, as Daisy slept curled in her bed, Marlene scrolled through her phone. "Still no messages about the flyers," she said softly. I leaned back in my chair. Maybe we should think about the vet. She needs a checkup, maybe some shots. We made the appointment for Saturday morning. The clinic was warm and bright, with a faint smell of antiseptic under the scent of lavender from a diffuser in the corner. Daisy was cautious at first, sitting close to Marlene's leg, but the vet, a friendly woman named Dr. Harris, had a way of speaking that instantly put her at ease. "She's healthy," Dr. Harris announced after the exam. "About 4 months old, maybe a mix of retriever and shepherd. No microchip." She looked at us over her glasses. "If you want to make it official, I can chip her today." Marlene and I exchanged a glance. It felt like a crossroads moment. "Let's do it," Marlene said finally. The quick procedure was over in moments. Daisy barely flinched, more interested in the treat Dr. Harris offered afterward. We left with a folder of paperwork, a bag of puppy food, and a quiet understanding between us that this was no longer temporary. Over the next few days, Daisy's personality blossomed even more. She learned sit and stay, though stay lasted about 3 seconds before she bounded over for her treat. She took to following Marlene from room to room, flopping down wherever she landed, and she'd greet me at the door with a joyful leap that nearly knocked me backward. One evening, after Daisy had tired herself out chasing a ball in the yard, we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the rooftops. The air was cool, the sky painted in soft shades of orange and pink. Daisy lay at our feet, her head resting on Marlene's shoe. "You know," Marlene said quietly, "I didn't realize how quiet the house felt before she came along." I nodded. It's like she pulled the color back into it. Daisy shifted in her sleep, letting out a small sigh that made us both smile. The following weekend, we decided to introduce her to Marlene's sister, Karen, who lived about 30 minutes away on a small farm. Karen was known for being a no-nonsense type, but when she opened the door and saw Daisy, her expression softened instantly. "She's a heartbreaker," Karen said, bending to scratch Daisy's head. "Bring her out back. The goats will get a kick out of her." Daisy had never seen goats before. She stared for a long moment, tail wagging uncertainly, then let out a bark. The goats blinked at her and resumed chewing grass. Within minutes, she was trotting along the fence line, clearly fascinated. We spent the afternoon there, letting Daisy explore under Karen's watchful eye. She ran through the grass, rolled in a sunny patch of dirt, and even napped for a while in the shade of a big oak tree. On the drive home, she was so tired she fell asleep in Marlene's lap, head lolling with the movement of the car. Marlene glanced down at her, and I could see that same unspoken feeling pass between us again. This sense that Daisy wasn't just a guest in our lives anymore. She was family. Still, there was a lingering question neither of us voiced. Someone had left her in that grocery basket. Someone had decided to walk away. And while part of me was grateful for it, because it brought her to us, another part wondered if there was more to that story. For now, though, we let it rest. Daisy had a warm bed, a full belly, and 2 people who adored her. And as far as she was concerned, that seemed to be all that mattered. It was early March when Daisy woke me before sunrise for the first time. I'd fallen asleep on Marlene's couch after an evening of board games and tea, and sometime in the stillness of night, Daisy decided my face needed a gentle nudge from her cold nose. Her tail thumped against the couch cushion, with steady rhythm as she stared at me with wide, expectant eyes. "You're up early," I murmured, still half asleep. She let out a tiny whine, the kind that's impossible to ignore. I got up quietly, careful not to wake Marlene, and opened the back door. The morning air hit me like a wave of cool mist. Daisy bounded into the yard, sniffing the frost-tipped grass, her little paws leaving faint prints. The horizon was just beginning to lighten, and for a moment I stood there, hands in my pockets, watching her take in the quiet world. She came back with a stick nearly twice her size, carrying it proudly to my feet as if presenting a treasure. I tossed it once, and she went tearing after it, with more energy than seemed possible for such an early hour. That became the start of our dawn routine. Each morning after that, Daisy would wake me with a nudge or a paw to the arm, and I'd take her out into the chilly light of day. We'd play fetch until her breaths turned into little clouds, and she'd settle down next to me on the porch steps, surveying her kingdom. One particularly crisp morning, Marlene joined us, still in her robe and holding a mug of coffee. She watched Daisy gnaw on her stick for a while, then said, "She's gotten bigger already. Her legs are longer." "She's going to be a tall one," I said, scratching Daisy's back. That week, we decided to try something new, a trip to the dog park in the next town over. It was a large fenced area with grassy hills and a few shaded benches, the kind of place where dogs could run freely without worry. Daisy was shy at first, staying close to us as she sized up the other dogs, but before long she was darting across the grass with a black and white spaniel and a lumbering old golden retriever. "She's a natural," Marlene said, watching her weave through the group like she'd known them forever. We met a few other dog owners, trading names and small talk while keeping an eye on the playful chaos. A woman named Jill, who had 2 collies, remarked on Daisy's gentle nature. "Some young ones get pushy," she said, "but she's got great manners." After an hour, Daisy came trotting back to us, panting happily, her fur dusted with bits of grass. She hopped into the back seat of the car and fell asleep almost instantly on the ride home, her head resting against my arm. The next few days were filled with little milestones. Daisy learned to fetch without chewing the ball to bits, mastered come with only the occasional detour, and even waited patiently by the door before walks. Marlene started teaching her shake, which quickly turned into Daisy offering her paw unprompted any time a treat appeared. One rainy afternoon, the three of us stayed in, watching the drops streak the windows while Daisy chewed on a toy near the fireplace. Marlene flipped through a magazine and said, "Karen called me this morning. She wants us to bring Daisy back to the farm for a longer visit. Says the goats miss her." I chuckled. "I'm sure they do." The following Saturday, we made the trip. Daisy seemed to recognize the turn-off to Karen's gravel driveway, her head popping up to look out the window. As soon as we parked, she leapt out, sniffing the familiar air. Karen greeted us at the door, her expression brightening. "There's my favorite troublemaker." This time, Daisy was bolder with the goats, trotting right up to the fence and giving a few cheerful barks. One goat even leaned over to sniff her, and Daisy wagged her tail so fast it looked like it might lift her off the ground. Karen took us for a walk around the property, Daisy darting between us, chasing every rustle in the grass. At one point, she disappeared behind the barn, and we found her a few minutes later, sitting proudly beside an old rubber ball she'd unearthed from somewhere. "She's got a nose for finding things," Karen said. "Could be good for training." That got Marlene thinking. On the drive back, she brought it up. "What if we tried a basic agility class or obedience training? I bet she'd enjoy it." I agreed, and we found a small training center not far from town. The first class was a mix of excited barking, wagging tails, and patient instructors. Daisy took to it quickly, walking beside us on command, sitting on cue, and even trying a tiny jump over a low bar. By the third week, she was the star pupil, drawing praise from the trainer. "She's sharp," the trainer said. "Keeps her focus. You've got a special one here." We celebrated her progress with a trip to the ice cream stand on the edge of town. They had a pup cup on the menu, plain vanilla topped with a dog biscuit. Daisy devoured it with the kind of focus she usually reserved for chasing balls. And when she finished, she licked my hand as if to say, "Thank you." One evening not long after, I came over to find Marlene standing in the kitchen with a puzzled look. "Someone left a small package on the porch," she said, holding up a brown paper bag. Inside was a rubber bone, a roll of dog waste bags, and a note that simply read, "For Daisy." We looked at each other. "From who?" I asked. "No idea," Marlene said. "No name, no return address." It was a small mystery, but not an unwelcome one. Whoever it was clearly meant well. Daisy, of course, was thrilled with her new toy, carrying it from room to room for the rest of the night. As the days stretched into early spring, our lives quietly rearranged themselves around her. Walks became part of the day's rhythm, outings were planned with her in mind, and there was always a space for her between us on the couch. One Saturday morning, as we sat outside sipping coffee, Daisy spotted a butterfly drifting through the yard. She followed it with slow, careful steps, her tail wagging in soft, curious arcs. When it finally landed on a patch of clover, she sniffed it gently and then sat down, as if content just to watch. Marlene smiled. "She makes me slow down, notice things I'd probably walk right past." I nodded, watching the two of them bathed in the golden light of morning. There was no rush, no noise, just the quiet, steady presence of a little dog who had turned our ordinary days into something worth pausing for. And though we still didn't know the story of how she ended up in that grocery basket, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Wherever she'd been before, she was exactly where she belonged now. By late spring, Daisy had developed a new morning habit that made Marlene both laugh and groan. She had learned the exact sound of the coffee maker turning on. The moment it clicked to life, Daisy would trot from wherever she had been sleeping, plop herself down in the kitchen doorway, and wait with bright eyes for her morning biscuit. She didn't even beg noisily. She just stared until Marlene caved in and reached for the treat jar. "She's training us," Marlene said one morning, as Daisy crunched away contentedly. I had started coming over earlier in the day, sometimes bringing bagels or muffins so we could all sit out on the porch before work. Daisy loved the porch mornings. She'd do a quick patrol of the yard, sniffing at the breeze, then settle near our chairs and watch the street like she was guarding her little corner of the world. One Thursday, a neighbor named Todd walked by and stopped to say hello. He was a tall man in his 50s with a friendly way about him, and his golden retriever, Max, had been a fixture in the neighborhood for years. Max padded up to Daisy, sniffed her politely, and then the two of them sat side by side as if they'd been friends forever. "She's a cutie," Todd said. "Where'd you get her?" I told him the grocery store basket story, and he let out a low whistle. "Lucky girl, landing with you two. If you ever want to bring her by for a play date, Max is always up for company." That weekend, we took him up on it. Max was older and slower, but Daisy seemed to sense it, matching her pace to his and gently dropping the ball near his paws instead of bouncing off in her usual whirlwind style. Marlene noticed it too. "She's got good instincts," she said softly, watching them move around the yard together. In between these new connections, Daisy's training classes continued. The instructor introduced weaving poles, and though Daisy initially tried to hop over them instead of weaving through, she caught on fast. Her tail wagged the entire time, as if every new skill was just another game to play. One evening after class, as we loaded Daisy into the back seat, Marlene said, "I think she's ready for the fun run next month." The fun run was a community event that included a short course for dogs, half walking path, half obstacle course. The idea of Daisy bounding along with other dogs while neighbors cheered was enough to make us both grin. In the weeks leading up to it, we practiced small versions of the obstacles in Marlene's backyard. We set up broom handles between buckets for jumps, laid down ropes to guide her weaving, and even introduced a low tunnel made from an old collapsible kid's play tube. Daisy approached each new challenge with eager curiosity, especially when a treat was waiting at the end. Meanwhile, the mystery package on the porch became less of a one-time curiosity and more of a repeating surprise. A week after the rubber bone, there was a small bag of gourmet dog biscuits with a ribbon around it. Then, a squeaky toy shaped like a squirrel. Marlene started keeping the packaging, hoping for some clue, but there was never a note or return label beyond "to Daisy." "It's sweet," she said one afternoon, "but I wish we knew who it was." I had a theory it might be one of the people we'd met at the park or training class. Whoever it was, Daisy didn't seem to care. She loved each gift as if it had fallen straight from the sky. One Saturday, after a morning at the park, we stopped by a small cafe with outdoor seating. Daisy settled under the table, resting her head on my foot, while Marlene and I sipped iced tea. A young couple at the next table leaned over to ask about her, and before we knew it, we were telling the grocery basket story again. The woman shook her head. "That's the kind of thing you hear about, but never think actually happens. She's lucky she found you." Later that afternoon, we headed home, Daisy dozing in the back. Marlene glanced at me as we drove. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't been at the store that day?" I hesitated. "I try not to. I just figure we were meant to be there." The fun run day arrived with perfect weather, sunny but not too hot. The park was full of dogs in colorful bandanas, their owners chatting and laughing. Daisy trotted along at my side, wearing a bright teal bandana that matched her harness. When it was our turn on the course, she moved through it like she'd been born to do it, jumping, weaving, trotting through the tunnel without a hint of hesitation. Marlene jogged alongside us, cheering her on, and when we crossed the little finish line, Daisy looked up at us with that bright-eyed grin that made everything feel lighter. The crowd applauded, and someone snapped a photo for the local paper. Later, that picture would show Daisy mid-leap over the last obstacle, ears flying, joy radiating from every inch of her. That night, we sat in Marlene's living room, Daisy stretched across both our laps, too tired to even lift her head when the doorbell rang. Marlene answered it to find another small package, this time a collar charm shaped like a tiny paw print. Again, no note. I turned it over in my hand. Whoever's doing this is paying attention. They knew she was in the fun run. Marlene clipped it to Daisy's collar, and the little charm caught the light as she shifted in her sleep. Spring rolled into early summer, and our days filled with longer walks, evenings on the porch, and trips to the park. Daisy had a way of making friends everywhere we went. Dogs, people, even the mail carrier who started keeping a biscuit in her pocket just for her. One evening, as the sun dipped low, we walked along the lake path, Daisy trotting happily ahead. A heron stood at the water's edge and Daisy froze, watching with rapt attention. The bird lifted off in a slow, graceful arc, and Daisy's head followed it until it disappeared into the trees. Marlene smiled. She notices everything. I nodded, feeling the same quiet gratitude I always did in moments like this. Daisy wasn't just part of our routine anymore. She was the thread that seemed to weave all the little moments together, turning them into something brighter. And though we still didn't know who had been leaving the gifts, or exactly why Daisy had ended up in that grocery basket, it was clear that the story we were living now mattered far more than the mystery of the past. The first real heat of summer arrived almost overnight, the kind that made the air shimmer above the asphalt and the cicadas start their chorus before noon. Marlene set up a shallow kiddie pool in the backyard, thinking it would help Daisy cool off. At first, Daisy treated it like a suspicious puddle, circling it twice and sniffing the water. Then she dipped one paw in, then another, and before long it was splashing around with both front legs, sending arcs of water onto the grass. Marlene stood at the back door, laughing so hard she had to wipe her eyes. "She's going to make this a daily thing," she said, as Daisy plopped down in the water, tongue lolling in pure satisfaction. That evening, after the heat broke, we took her on a walk to the park. The warm air was thick with the smell of cut grass and barbecue from a nearby picnic area. Daisy's tail wagged non-stop as she greeted other dogs along the path. One woman with a beagle stopped us to admire her. "I've seen her picture in the local paper," she said. "The fun run, right?" We chatted for a moment, and as we walked away, Marlene leaned toward me. "It's still strange to think people recognize her." I grinned. "She's basically a local celebrity." The next morning, a small envelope appeared on Marlene's porch. Inside was a hand-drawn sketch of Daisy mid-leap, clearly from the fun run photo. It wasn't signed, just like the other gifts, but the style was careful, almost affectionate. Marlene studied it for a long moment before propping it on the kitchen counter. "Someone's watching out for her," she said quietly. A few days later, we took Daisy to visit Todd and Max again. The older retriever moved slower now, his steps more deliberate, but Daisy seemed to sense his pace, keeping close by without crowding him. They lay side by side under a shade tree while Todd and I talked about the summer events in town. You should bring her to the farmer's market, Todd suggested. Lots of folks bring their dogs. She'd love it. So the next Saturday, we did just that. The market was a colorful mix of stalls overflowing with fresh produce, flowers, and handmade crafts. Daisy walked between us, sniffing the air heavy with scents of baked bread and ripe peaches. Vendors bent down to greet her, and one woman slipped her a small piece of carrot, which Daisy accepted like it was the greatest gift she'd ever received. We wandered past a stall selling handmade collars, and the vendor, a cheerful man with a straw hat, pointed to Daisy. She'd look great in something floral, he said. Marlene hesitated only a moment before picking out a collar patterned with tiny daisies on a soft green background. It fit perfectly. That evening we sat on the porch, the last of the day's light fading as Daisy dozed at our feet, the new collar bright against her fur. Marlene leaned back in her chair. I think she knows she's home now. Really knows it. The heat kept building over the next week, and we shifted our walks to early mornings and late evenings. One night, while the sky still held the last blush of sunset, we walked by the lake. Fireflies blinked in the grass, and Daisy's head turned this way and that, trying to follow their tiny lights. At one point she froze, then pounced gently on a spot where one had landed, only to watch it lift off again. We were halfway back to the car when Marlene stopped short. Sitting on the hood was another small brown package. She picked it up slowly, glancing around the quiet lot. Inside was a braided rope toy and a note that read, "Keep playing, Daisy." This time the handwriting was neat but unfamiliar. Marlene folded the note carefully and slipped it into her pocket. "It's starting to feel like we should know who's doing this," she said. A few days later, we were at the training center when the instructor pulled me aside. "A woman came by earlier and asked about Daisy," she said. "Didn't leave her name, just said she'd seen her in the paper and wanted to know how she was doing. I told her she was thriving." On the drive home, Marlene was quiet, her hand resting on Daisy's back as she slept in the back seat. "Do you think it's her old owner?" she asked finally. I thought about it for a moment. "Could be. But if they wanted her back, they'd say so, right?" "Maybe," she murmured, though her tone held a thread of uncertainty. We didn't get an answer that night, but over the next week, Daisy's world kept expanding. We took her to a small creek just outside town, where she waded in the shallows, snapping playfully at the water. She found a smooth, flat rock she seemed to like, climbing onto it and standing with her tail wagging as the current swirled around her paws. One afternoon, Karen called and invited us back to the farm for the 4th of July. "We're having a cookout," she said. And yes, Daisy's invited. The day of the cookout was warm but breezy, the smell of grilled corn and burgers filling the air. Daisy made the rounds like she'd been raised for social gatherings, greeting each guest with a wag and a sniff. The goats remembered her too, trotting up to the fence to meet her halfway. After the sun set, we sat in the yard with the fireflies glowing in the grass. In the distance, fireworks bloomed above the trees, their colors reflecting faintly in Daisy's eyes as she sat between us. She didn't startle, just watched, her ears flicking at the sound. Driving home that night, the windows down to let in the summer air, I thought about how much had changed since the day we found her in that basket. We still didn't know who had left her there, or who kept leaving her gifts. But what we did know was simple. Daisy had woven herself into every part of our lives, and she was still just getting started. August began with a stretch of golden, breezy days that made every afternoon feel like an invitation to be outside. The sun was warm but not harsh, and the air carried the scent of wildflowers from the meadows beyond town. Daisy seemed to sense the change, her energy crackling from the moment she woke until she collapsed in a heap of contentment each night. One morning, I arrived at Marlene's to find Daisy waiting at the window, tail thumping against the sill as soon as my car pulled in. Marlene met me at the door with a grin. Guess what she did? She brought me my slippers before I even asked, dropped them right at my feet. She's becoming a butler, I said, stepping inside. Daisy circled me twice, then ran off to find something else to bring. She returned a minute later with one of her squeaky toys, holding it like a prized jewel. We decided to take advantage of the mild weather and drove to a trail just outside town that wound through a patch of forest before opening into a small meadow. The path was dappled in shade, cicadas humming softly in the background. Daisy trotted ahead, but always within sight, stopping now and then to investigate a fallen leaf or a curious patch of moss. When we reached the meadow, she bounded through the tall grass, the tips brushing against her back. She chased a grasshopper halfway across before circling back to us, panting and grinning. Marlene spread a blanket, and we sat while Daisy explored within earshot. I'd brought a thermos of iced tea, and we sipped it while watching her dart in and out of the grass like she was playing her own game of hide-and-seek. It was on our way back to the car that we saw it, a small envelope tucked under the windshield wiper. Marlene's steps slowed as she reached for it. Inside was a short note written in the same neat handwriting as before. She looks happy. That's all I wanted. We stood there for a long moment, the quiet of the parking lot pressing in around us. So it is someone from her past, Marlene said finally. Seems like it, I agreed, glancing toward the other cars, though most were empty. She slipped the note into her bag. They're watching from a distance. Maybe that's enough for them. The next day, life went on as if nothing had happened. Daisy had her morning biscuit. We took her for a walk, and she chased a tennis ball until she flopped on the lawn, belly up to the sky. Yet the note lingered in the back of my mind, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit into the picture we had of her life now. A week later, Todd invited us to a small gathering in his backyard. Max was slower than ever, but his eyes still lit up when Daisy trotted in. The two of them settled under the shade tree while we sat around the table with lemonade and sandwiches. Todd's neighbor, a soft-spoken woman named Helen, asked about Daisy's story, and once again we told it, the words now practiced but still carrying the same weight. After lunch, Daisy wandered to the far corner of the yard, sniffing at the fence. When I called her, she came back with something in her mouth, another braided rope toy, new and clean, as if it had been left there for her. Marlene and I exchanged a glance. "This is starting to get strange," she murmured. That night, we talked about it on the porch, while Daisy lay at our feet, gnawing on the toy. "Whoever it is," Marlene said, "they know where we go. The park, the lake, now here. It's not just coincidence." "I think they're making sure she's okay," I said, "and they're doing it quietly." The next weekend, the town held its annual summer fair. There were food stalls, games, and a small stage where local bands played. We brought Daisy along, and she quickly became a hit among the crowd, especially with children who knelt to pat her head or offer her a gentle scratch behind the ears. We took turns holding her leash while grabbing lemonade and fried dough, and she sat patiently at our feet, ears swiveling toward every new sound. In the middle of the afternoon, as we were watching a juggling act, a woman brushed past us and dropped something into my hand without a word. By the time I turned to see her face, she had melted into the crowd. It was another small collar charm, this one shaped like a tiny heart. No note, no explanation. Back at Marlene's that evening, we clipped the charm next to the paw print one on Daisy's collar. They jingled softly together as she walked around, completely unaware of the quiet network of attention woven around her. As August wore on, we fell back into the rhythms that had become second nature. Morning walks, afternoons in the yard, training sessions that were as much about play as learning. Daisy mastered leave it and wait, though she still occasionally decided that certain sticks were too good to resist. One Saturday morning, Karen came by unannounced, her truck pulling into the driveway just as we were heading out for a walk. She stepped out with a wide smile. "Thought I'd kidnap you all for a picnic at the farm," she said. We packed sandwiches and drove out, Daisy's head occasionally popping up between the seats to watch the road. At the farm, she greeted the goats like old friends, then sprawled in the shade while we ate. Karen asked about the mystery gifts, and when we told her the latest, she raised an eyebrow. Sounds like someone who cares, but doesn't want to step in. Maybe they think they're doing the right thing by staying away. That night, as we drove back into town, the first hints of autumn were in the air. A cooler breeze, the faint rustle of leaves beginning to loosen from the trees. Daisy sat in the back seat, her eyes half closed, the jingling of her charms the only sound besides the hum of the road. We still didn't have answers, but watching her stretch out in her bed once we got home, I realized something had shifted. Whoever had been in her life before, they had chosen to let her go. And for all the mystery, there was one truth we could feel in every wag of her tail and every nudge of her nose. Daisy was exactly where she was meant to be. The first cool mornings of September arrived quietly, like someone had drawn a sheer curtain over summer. The air was crisp enough that you could see your breath in the early hours, and the leaves at the edge of town began to blush gold and red. Daisy seemed invigorated by the change, her morning bursts of energy longer and more joyful, her nose lifting into the breeze as though reading a story written in scents we couldn't understand. One Saturday, Marlene suggested a trip to the apple orchard a few miles out of town. We'd both gone there as kids, and now they allowed dogs on the property as long as they were on a leash. Daisy hopped into the back seat, tail already thumping in anticipation of something new. The orchard was a spread of rolling rows, the grass soft underfoot, the air heavy with the sweetness of ripe fruit. We walked between the trees, Daisy stopping often to sniff at fallen apples. A few times she tried to pick one up, and Marlene laughed, gently taking it from her mouth and placing it in the basket instead. We found a quiet spot near the edge of the orchard to sit for a while, the sun filtering through the branches above us. A few other dog owners passed by, and Daisy greeted them politely, her tail wagging in slow, steady arcs. That's when Marlene spotted it. Tucked into the crook of the basket handle was a small, folded note. She pulled it free, scanning the words before passing it to me. It read, "Thank you for loving her." Neither of us spoke for a moment. The handwriting was the same as the note left under the windshield a few weeks back. Marlene looked around, but there were only a handful of people in sight, none of them watching us closely. Back home, we pinned the note on the bulletin board in the kitchen, where the others had begun to collect. Daisy lay on the rug, chewing her rope toy, completely unaware of the quiet thread connecting her old life to her new one. A few days later, Todd stopped by with Max for a short visit. The older retriever moved slowly now, but his eyes still brightened when he saw Daisy. The two of them settled under the maple tree in Marlene's yard while we sat on the porch. Todd mentioned that the fall festival was coming up in 2 weeks. "They're having a pet costume contest this year," he said with a grin. "You should enter her." Marlene laughed. "I don't know about dressing her up." But later, when we were tidying the porch, she said, "It could be fun. Something simple. Nothing uncomfortable." We ended up finding a soft bumblebee costume online. Just a striped vest with tiny wings. When it arrived, Daisy sniffed it thoroughly, then stood patiently while we slipped it on. The sight of her buzzing around the living room had us both in stitches. In the days leading up to the festival, we kept our walks a little shorter in the evenings as the daylight faded earlier. One evening, as we rounded the corner toward Marlene's house, I noticed a small package on the porch. Inside was a bandana printed with autumn leaves and tiny acorns. No note this time, but it felt deliberate. The day of the festival was bright and brisk, the streets lined with stalls selling cider, pies, and handmade crafts. The pet costume contest was set up near the main stage, and Daisy trotted along beside us in her bumblebee outfit, drawing smiles from everyone we passed. There were dogs dressed as pumpkins, superheroes, even a dragon, but Daisy's calm sweetness seemed to charm the judges. She didn't win first place, but she earned a ribbon for Most Heartwarming, which Marlene clipped to her harness for the rest of the day. As we were leaving, weaving through the crowd toward the car, someone brushed past me and pressed something small into my hand. It was a brass tag engraved with the words, "She's home now." I spun around, but whoever had given it to me had already disappeared into the crowd. That night, we sat at Marlene's kitchen table with the tag between us. "They're telling us something," she said quietly. "Or trying to," I replied. We clipped the tag to Daisy's collar alongside her other charms. She jingled as she moved across the room to curl up by the fireplace, utterly at peace. As September rolled toward October, the rhythm of our days continued. Morning walks now meant crunching through fallen leaves, and Daisy discovered the joy of chasing them when the wind caught them just right. She'd leap into the air, snapping at a swirling red or gold leaf before it touched the ground. One weekend, Karen invited us to the farm for a bonfire. Daisy spent the afternoon running between the goats, sniffing the hay bales, and keeping close when the fire was lit. As we sat under the stars, Karen brought up the mystery again. "You could leave a note yourself," she suggested. "If they're following you, they might see it." Marlene considered it. "Maybe. But what would I say?" "Something simple," Karen said. "Let them know she's loved. Invite them to talk if they want to." A few days later, Marlene taped an envelope to the front door. Inside was a short note. "Daisy is safe, happy, and loved. If you want to talk, we're open to it." Weeks passed with no direct response, but the gifts continued, this time a set of tennis balls left neatly on the porch, and a small plush toy shaped like a squirrel. Through it all, Daisy's joy remained the constant thread. Whether she was stretched out in a patch of sunlight, trotting beside us on a frosty morning, or nudging one of her toys toward Max during a visit, she carried with her a sense of contentment that seemed to seep into everything around her. One evening in early October, we took her to the lake just as the sun was setting. The water mirrored the sky's deep oranges and purples, and Daisy stood at the edge, her reflection rippling beside her. Marlene slipped her arm through mine. "No matter where she came from," she said, "she was meant to end up here." Daisy turned her head at the sound of her name, tail wagging, and in that moment, the mystery felt less like an unanswered question and more like a quiet blessing we were still learning to understand. October brought the kind of crisp mornings that made the grass sparkle with frost and the air smell faintly of wood smoke. Marlene had started keeping a basket of scarves and gloves by the door, and Daisy had figured out that the sight of us bundling up meant a walk was coming. She'd station herself at the door, tail swaying in slow anticipation, watching every move until we reached for her leash. One Saturday morning, we decided to visit the pumpkin patch outside town. It was a sprawling farm with rows of pumpkins in every size and shape, and a section roped off for hayrides. The moment we stepped out of the car, Daisy's nose went to work, darting from one scent to another. She trotted between us as we walked down the rows, pausing now and then to sniff a pumpkin or tilt her head at the sound of children laughing nearby. While Marlene picked out a few small pumpkins for her porch, I noticed a folded slip of paper tucked under the stem of one at the edge of the field. My first thought was that it might be a receipt or some lost list. But when I unfolded it, I saw the familiar neat handwriting. "You've given her more than I could." I glanced around the field. Families were scattered everywhere, moving between the rows, carrying armfuls of pumpkins. There was no clear sign of anyone watching us. Marlene came over, her arms full, and I handed her the note. She read it slowly, then folded it and slipped it into her jacket pocket without a word. Back at the house, the note joined the others on the bulletin board. Daisy curled on the rug in front of the fireplace, unaware of the quiet exchange that had happened among the pumpkins. The next week, our walks took on a new sound, the crunch of leaves underfoot. Daisy delighted in chasing them as they skittered across the sidewalk, leaping into small piles we passed along the way. One evening, Todd and Max joined us, and the four of us strolled down the leaf-strewn street under the glow of porch lights. Daisy matched her pace to Max's slower steps, occasionally glancing back as if to check on him. Halloween came with its own energy. Marlene had carved one of her pumpkins into a cheerful grin, and Daisy spent the afternoon watching from the porch as children passed by in costume. We didn't dress her up this time, but she wore her autumn leaf bandana and sat proudly by the door, tail wagging at every knock. The kids adored her, some stopping to give her a quick pat before heading to the next house. Later that night, after the last trick-or-treater had gone, Marlene opened the door to let Daisy out into the yard one last time. When they came back in, she was holding a small cloth bag tied with a piece of twine. Inside were 3 new tennis balls and another note. "She loves these. Keep letting her play." The handwriting matched all the others. Marlene leaned against the doorframe, the bag in her hand. "They're not going away," she said quietly. The following weekend, we decided to drive out to the nature reserve for a longer hike. The trail wound through a stretch of pine forest, the air sharp and fragrant. Daisy trotted ahead, ears perked, stopping now and then to investigate a rustle in the underbrush. We reached a clearing with a small bench overlooking a valley, and while we sat, Daisy lay at our feet, content to watch the birds wheel overhead. It was on the way back down the trail that I noticed a small metal tin placed carefully on a flat rock. Inside were a few dog treats and a tiny silver charm shaped like a bone. No note this time, but it was clear it was meant for Daisy. We let her have one treat before tucking the tin into my bag. At home, we clipped the bone charm to her collar alongside the others. The jingling sound had become part of her presence, a cheerful little music that followed her everywhere. As November drew closer, the weather shifted again. Morning frost became more common, and we started wearing heavier jackets on our walks. Daisy seemed to love the cold, her energy bursting through in short sprints up and down the yard. She'd come barreling toward us, ears flapping, before skidding to a stop and waiting for a thrown stick or ball. One evening, Karen called with an invitation. "We're having a little gathering before the holidays get too busy," she said. "Bonfire, hot cider, the works. Bring Daisy." The night at the farm was calm and clear, stars scattered thick across the sky. Daisy roamed the familiar grounds, stopping now and then to check in with us by the fire. She settled at Marlene's feet as we sipped cider, the glow of the flames painting her fur in warm light. Karen asked about the notes and gifts again, listening closely as we described the latest ones. "It's starting to feel like they're telling a story," she said, "piece by piece." On the drive home, the road quiet around us, Marlene glanced into the back seat at Daisy, who was asleep with her head on her paws. "I wonder if they'll ever tell us the whole thing," she murmured. For now, the only answer was the steady rhythm of the tires on the road, the jingle of charms whenever Daisy shifted in her sleep, and the quiet comfort of knowing that however the story had begun, the part we were living now was the one that mattered most to her. By the time November had fully settled in, the mornings came with a thin sheet of frost on the grass and the kind of crisp air that made your breath puff out like steam. The trees along the street had mostly shed their leaves, leaving the sidewalks scattered with brittle reds and golds. Daisy seemed to love this part of the year. Her walks were full of new scents, her energy sharp and bright in the chill. Every step she took was a small announcement of joy, tail swaying, like she was waving to the world. The first snow came early. We woke one morning to find the yard blanketed in white, the air still and silent, except for the occasional groan of a branch under the weight. Marlene stood at the window, mug of coffee in hand, watching Daisy step into it for the first time. She lifted her paws high as she moved forward, then lowered her head to sniff at the powder before breaking into a bounding run that threw sprays of snow behind her. Marlene laughed, the sound light in the quiet house. "She was made for this," she said. Later that week, as we were finishing a morning walk, we saw it. Another envelope on the porch. The handwriting was the same, the careful neatness familiar now. This one read, "If you have time, I'd like to meet you. Saturday, 2 p.m., at the park bench by the North Trail, alone." Marlene read it twice, her brow furrowing. "Alone?" "They must mean without Daisy," I said, though the thought felt odd. Or maybe they don't want it to feel like a crowd. We debated it for 2 days, going back and forth about whether to go. In the end, we decided it was worth it. Whoever this person was, they had been part of Daisy's story longer than we had. Saturday came cold but clear. Marlene wore a thick coat and a knitted scarf, her hands deep in her pockets as she walked toward the North Trail. I stayed home with Daisy, distracting her with a game of fetch in the yard. When Marlene returned an hour later, she didn't speak right away. She hung her coat, toed off her boots, and knelt to wrap her arms around Daisy. After a long hug, she sat at the kitchen table, her cheeks pink from the cold. "It was a woman," she said finally. "Late 20s, maybe. She had a brown coat and a knit hat pulled low. She said her name was Emily. Emily had found Daisy on the side of a rural road one rainy night, shivering and thin. She had taken her in, cared for her as best she could, but her life was unstable. She was between jobs, moving from couch to couch, and couldn't give Daisy the kind of home she needed. When she left her in the grocery basket, she had hoped someone kind would find her. "She's been following from a distance ever since," Marlene said. "She saw us in the store that day and knew right away Daisy was safe. The gifts, the notes, it was her way of staying connected." I asked if she wanted Daisy back. Marlene shook her head. She said no. She said Daisy belongs here now, but she wanted to see her one last time. The next day, we arranged to meet Emily at the park, this time with Daisy. She stood near the bench when we arrived, hands clasped in front of her. Daisy tilted her head at the sight of her, then walked forward slowly, sniffing her hand. Emily knelt, letting Daisy come closer, and after a few moments Daisy wagged her tail and leaned in for a gentle scratch behind the ears. They stayed like that for a long time, Emily smiling through eyes that shone with something unspoken. "You're happy," she murmured. "That's all I needed to know." When it was time to go, Emily stood and stepped back. "Take care of her," she said softly. "She's special." We promised we would, and she walked away without looking back. Her figure soon lost among the trees. Life settled back into its easy rhythm after that, though something in it felt deeper now, more grounded. The mystery was over, but it had left behind a thread of connection that would always be part of Daisy's story. The charms on her collar jingled as she moved through the house, small reminders of the journey that had brought her here. Winter wrapped the town in quiet. Daisy loved the snow, leaping into drifts and burying her nose until only her tail showed above the surface. We took her on long walks along the frozen lake, her breath puffing in the air like smoke. At night, she curled between us on the couch, warm and content, the firelight catching in her eyes. On New Year's morning, we sat on the porch with coffee, watching Daisy trot through the yard, chasing the wind. The sun was just cresting the horizon, turning the snow to gold. Marlene glanced at me, a small smile playing on her lips. "You know, I can't imagine the house without her now." I nodded. She was meant to be here. Every step she took brought her to this. Daisy bounded up the porch steps, tail wagging, a small stick clamped between her teeth. She dropped it at our feet, ready for the next throw, her whole body radiating the simple, unshakable joy of being home. And in that moment, with the cold air in our lungs and the morning light spilling across the yard, it felt like the story had come full circle. Not an ending, but the beginning of everything Daisy had been waiting for.